Today, Yud Base Adar Tashin Samech Tes. We're in the Hemshek Samech Tes, the very Shalom page, Chok Gimel.
Right, so we're more or less at the siyum at the dogma that we brought for the difference between oyer of a shame, and we saw that was the union of Teresh Biksav and Teresh Bial Peh. And we saw that by Teresh Biksav, the Oisias were union from Lavusha Mu'uchad, or Lavusha Machuba, as we call it here. And the Oisias of Teresh Bial Peh were more in the even of Lavusha Hanifra. And we saw that the Alter Rebbe brings down in Tovku Samech Tes that the Koiches HaNefesh are also a union from a Lavush Mechuber compared to the other Gimel Lavushim of Machshava Dibba or Maisa. And in that Kufa there's a union from Lavush Nifrad and Lavush Mechuber, the union of the Eser Koiches. Or they are the union from Lavusha Mechuber, and the union of the Gimel Lavushim, Machshava Dibur Maisa, they are the union of Lavusha Nifrad. And that's what he brings down, that Dibur is the union from Lavusha Nifrad. Mashenki Machshava is the union from Lavusha Muchad. Kamoike Noisis to Teresh Biksav, hey Moises a Machshava. And therefore, Kamoishkos Mochimachem with the Alter Rebbe, in Geras HaKodesh at the end of Simon Yud Tes, the Alter Rebbe also brings over there a whole union about how the Oasis and the Sefer Torah are the union from Machshava. They're the union from Lavusha Machshava. Or Malchus Peh, Torah Shebal Peh Korinan Law. Yeah, well, that's what we say every Friday in the Posuk Eliyahu, that Malchus Peh, and that's Torah Shebal Peh Korinan Law, and that's the union of Dibur. So that's the difference, that it's also a Lavush, but it's a Lavush local kachma miyuchad, and it's not so much nogeh the union of the oisias to the etem halachas of the Teresh Bial Peh. Mashikim, we saw that the isachtas the oisias with Teresh Biksav, that's nogeh in the etem hamshocha of Teresh Biksav al yedei the kriya of those oisias, and to the point that even if it's lacking one ois, or even if it's not made in the right oifen, then it can be pesel the whole Sefer Torah, and the Indian which is supposed to be nimshach alidei kriya in them Sefer Torah is not nimshach. Sure. So from that we see that the Indian Indian Hashem is bedugma to the Indian from the oisias of Teresh Bial Peh, which means that even though they have a certain shaykhs to the etem, but it's not compared to the shaykhs of the etem kamoy inyan ha'oyer. We want to compare the inyan to Lavusha Muchad more to the inyan of oyer. So now we start off with a new inyan, and we say kriyas Hashem nifne ha'etem. This is now a new diktuk. We're saying that the inyan of Shem is not a gilui min ha'etem, and it's not kore v'shayach el ha'etem. Mashen kin the inyan from oyer. So the kashi is that we see when we call a person's name, then he's nifne b'kol atzmuse when he calls his name. And dafke is poiner b'kol asokov. Doesn't matter what he might be busy with, but he's harega. When he hears his name, he's poiner, not just as miktas mimeno, but he's poiner b'kol atzmuse. So that's what he means. Nifne ha'etem, that your whole being turns when your name is called. So that l'chera tends to indicate, kesher atzmi between the shem and the etem. K'moy kein alidei shemeshabchim oisei v'shem chacham v'chazdon mo'irim atzmus hakoyach k'moy shkosu b'mokim acher. As put down in Derek Mitzvah Barichas and Mitzvah Halel, the Rebbe Tzom Tzedek is marich in that inyan, that if you are meshabeach a person that he has a certain midah. It can be a different lefanim. Here we're talking about, you call him a chacham, and you call him b'shem chacham, b'derech praise and shevach. Well, that causes that he's megala from his etzem kol many chachmas that he mightn't have been mishtadel klar to give them for. Over the day that he gets a name, that he's a chacham, then he has to meet the challenge, and that calls out at him that he's machriach asatzmei to be megala these inyonim. And if you call him a chasdan, he also becomes tremendously kind to people, and is megala inyoni chesed that he never had begolu upon him before. And that's because the inyan Hashem is shy to the inyan ha'et.
Does he have to hear himself called that?
Huh?
Does he have to hear himself called a chacham and a chasdan? Or is it just that people say it?
No, he makes an effort to make sure that those things are begoli etzloi. You follow? In other words, that it calls out in him a tesefes etim hishtadlas. Because up to now it mightn't have bothered him particularly, but now that he's got a name, and meshabchim we say, that he's a chacham, that he makes effort, but he makes an effort to be megala that. That's a inyan that we see that the name, or the concept of a name, calls out a giloy odietem. And that's the difference, however, between the two dugmai. It says that in the first case we're talking about what we call Shem ha'etem. In the second case we're talking about what's called Shem ha'toyar. And later on we'll see there are other Shemes, also the Shem ha'kinui, Shem ha'mushal, Shem ha'pu'ula. We'll see different names which are brought down by Hemshech of this particular Maimah even. It's a the inyan of a person's personal name, Kamoi, Avram or Yitzchak, or whatever the name may be, that's called Shem ha'etzem. And when that's called, then Kol ha'etzem, Kamoi Shehu, is pointed with all the details, Kol ha'guf, Kol ha'inyonim. And for was because the Shem ha'etzem has got a shachet mit klolos ha'etzem. But either the term chacham or chasdan, or those are what we call shemus toya. They're only metayer certain inyonim. They describe or picture to us certain inyonim which go forth from the etzem. For example, a chacham is somebody that's supposed to produce chachma on all occasions. A chesed is somebody that's supposed to give a chasdan. Somebody is supposed to give forth chesed on all occasions. Well, that's not necessarily a description of the whole of his etzem. It's only like a descriptive name, but it's a descriptive name which reaches and touches the etzem. Dahainu, that when he feels that he's been called by that name, then he feels an obligation and a chiyuv to call out of the koiches atzmiyim he has, the best possible gilui of that particular, or other koiches also for that matter. And so therefore the inyan ad Hashem, whether it be a Shem ha'etzem or a Shem ha'toya, has the ability to call out from the etzem. So the Rebbe says, to kishem masha'inkein al-idei ha'oyer yichelim rak lahagia el ha'etzem avaloi lahamshich es ha'etzem. Aber with the inyan from oyer only leads us back to the etzem. Oyer, if we follow oyer, then we come back to the etzem, and we can know what we call before Mailas ha'etzem. Our inyonim shachim to mahus ha'etzem that we can't know through the oyer. So here we see then a supremacy in oyer over name, over Shem. The kishem masha'inkein alidei oyer, we can reach etzem, but not to be mamshich as ha'etzem. The kishem shalidei oyer einanu yodim oifen mahus ha'etzem. Just like through the inyan of an oyer, we don't know the manner of the very mahus of the etzem, rak ma'alosai levad kanal, only the maila of the etzem. K'moikein, similarly to that, alidei oyer yichelim rak lahagia el ha'etzem. We can get back to the etzem and come to a toisefes awareness of the etzem and even of its maila, but not into the inyonim mahusim of the etzem. היינו שמהאויר והגילוי אנו יודעים הפלוס ורוממוס העצם. In other words, we come to know the wondrousness and even the greatness of the elevation of the etzem. So now, earlier in the previous sentence, he said that we can be magia el etzem, and now he was moisif that we can come to the oil, we can come to know hafloas v'roimim es etzem. So that's a different nuance. Afu Pikein said that's not the purest that you've been mamshir the etzem. And the implication being that ali day shame, that you cause a person to be poine b'kolatz musay, then that tends to indicate that you are mamshir the etzem. So what's the dinim of this? It's like we saw earlier, and we had it in the previous Omid and earlier in the whole Hemshech, that Uyer, being as it is only a ha'ora bilvad, only a luminescence, when you know the etzem through the oil, then you know that the relationship between that oil and its ma'or is a ha'ora legabi ha'etzem, and we know that a ha'ora legabi ha'etzem is only a dover chitoni beliko negia el ha'etzem mami. And that teaches us that the etzem is b'emes marumam from the ha'ora. Like we saw earlier, that we said that even the shemesh, the etzem mahus ha'shemesh is marumam b'mayla legamre, even from our floor, even to the point that we said that it's rochek, betachas arichuk, to know anything about the etzem from the ha'ora. In other words, the very fact that Ur takes you back to the etzem, at the same time tells you that it's not by any means lefi erecha etzem, which teaches you that the etzem is murumam and mufla, and that comes from the very relationship atzmi of the Ur b'derech ha'ora buvad to its etzem. We saw that led us to the conclusion that the etzem is murumam legamri. Like he said, you can't really come to know anything about the mahusa atzmas from the oyer, even though the oyer is me'ena moyer, as we saw. And so all it does is teaches us certain milas legabi the makablim that there are in the etzem, but not the mahusa etzem klal, and in Azar even that we all we can know is that the etzem is murumam or mufla legamre, for even she'ein ared legabi dat ha'ora. But b'mahusa ina we don't know what is that. What is the even of that rayman? Avaloila hamshich as etzem. Yeah, we can't come to draw the etzem forth. Yeah, to be mamshich the etzem, that we have no ability through the inyan of the oil. The mila of Shem is that you are mamshich the etzem. In other words, you cause a pnir b'kol atzmus elidei kriyas Hashem, and even in Hashem atoya you cause him to call out from his koiches atzmiyim certain giluyim in the koiches which wouldn't have been shayches beli that shevach that you gave him. So lefise then that the inyan from Shem has got a mila nifla legabi dioyer. As im kain, why do we keep saying that the inyan from oyer is bekorev and shayach al etzem and the Shem not? The Shem causes what we call a pnir on the part of the etzem. Zehu says the Rebbe mitzad etzem madrigose. The be'etzem hine dova hanivdal umushrash bia etzem yesamia. He said this is mitzad the etzem madrige be'etzem atzmusei of Shem, because being as it is a dova nivdal, then it's mushrash be'etzem. Yes, it's got a deeper shoyrish in the etzem more than what they are. O k'maykein hamshachas savas adova nivdal hu b'chinas koyach atzmi yesem mi hamshachas ha'oyer min ha'etzem. So since the inyan of the dova nivdal, that's got a shoyrish in the etzem in a much deeper or more essential way, and therefore in order to be megala that thing from the etzem, and to bring it into Amshocha, then that's bekoyach atzmi mitzad the etzem harbe yoter me'asher ha'inu, which is only a ha'ora, because we even went to the point of saying that a ha'ora was like a dover ma'mela, even though it's not mamish ma'mela, it's even for use of a sof, it's similar to the inim from ma'mela. Ve'ila in the inim and Shem, being as it is necessary to cause a much greater koyach atzmi in the etzem mamish, to cause a amshocha of the Shem, and in that, or the amshocha alidei Shem, or that's because it's mushrash, but even atzmi in the etzem more than what they heard. I will be in a gilui, purely in the Indian of gilui, yesh yisron godel ba'er mi'ah Shem. The Erev B'chinas Gilui Etzem or Mi'ein Etzem, Lefishu B'chinas Dveikes Ela Etzem. Mashikin Shem is not. Shem comes with Derech Helim or with Derech Rich. So I need to understand what's it this Va'inyan, that something which is mushrash, something which is B'chinas Nivdal, is mushrash in the Etzem Yoiser, and the Amshocha is B'koyach Etzem Yoter. What's it as far? What sort of Indian is that? Mashenki, Adar, which is only a ha'ora bilvad, ein leze a hashrosha in the etzem, or mamela ein leze koyach ha'etzem kol kach. What sort of Indian is that? So one of the famous mashalim for that in Siddur is the Indian lamaila of the Rishimo compared to the kav. What the Rishimo is in the etzem nekuda that was left b'toich hatzimtzum. And in that respect, lo yinoga bo hatzimtzum, ki yadu, the famous lashon when I get to the Rishimo, the tzimtzum never after it, because it was there, as it was, even because there, when the tzimtzum occurred, it never moved, or nothing occurred to the Rishimo. So, in order to understand the Rishimo, then another moshel is given, because the Rishimo is not really a moshel. The Rishimo is just a statement of a inya. And the moshel is the inya from koyach hazrika we have before, even though there are other moshelim. But the one that helps us understand Benegeh is something we had already before here, the inya from koyach hazrika. And that is that when a mensch throws something, then even though that power to throw was miyuched inside his etzem, with the koyach hatnuah, ha'atzmiyas, that there is in a mensch, the ability to move and to move his limbs and to make activity with his limbs, it's called koyach hatnuah. Well, that's miyuched be'etzem ha'adam. It's miyuched be'gufay, miyuched be'nafshay. What happens when he causes that goes out from himself and has an ability to move some other entity? That's what happens when he throws something. Well, that's called a koyach nivdal, because the infant zrika leaves his whole being and goes out and embraces another entity and causes it to move. And it's only alidei his bonanas and alidei observation. If somebody were to see him throw it, then they would be able to know that came from his koyach. Otherwise, if they saw the stone floating through the air, they wouldn't know how it was floating through the air. It wouldn't be clear to them how it was floating through the air. Therefore, the Indian goes out from the koyach atzmi etzel ha'adam, and it's mislabish, or it is noisei, but derech makif yoter. It's not so much a Indian from the slabshas on the stone, and it carries the stone until the actual power that he put into it begins to cease, and then it falls down to the ground. So because then the gravity takes what's called the koyach mashiach of the earth takes over. So it's put down in Tzivas that we see that when a mensch throws, then that's a koyach yisera that he has to make. He makes a tremendous effort in himself, and the inner of throwing is a koyach atzmi harbe yoter than if he just moves his hand around, or if he does other movements with his body in general. And that's because he's causing this inyan to become nivdo mimeno, and it goes out in even a pirud mimeno, or therefore it demands and calls out from the etzem a greater shurish atzmi in the mensch than a thing which goes off from him b'derech ha'ora bilvad. For example, if he teaches somebody a initial seichel, or he shows them a inifan amida, which is meya mimenu klapei him, well, that doesn't cause him the type of effort that it does a inifan zrika. And that's because the zrika is calling on a inyan nivdal, or that calls a greater and deeper effort mitzad the etzem. In other words, that the shurish of it is deeper inside the etzem. And as far as some people are not able to throw very powerful because they haven't worked on their bodies, the amount that they can get out is only a relatively minor thing, and it causes them pain and effort and strain, depending on the obstacle, on the article that they throw. Now, another dogma to that, slightly more on Ruchnius, is what the Alter brings in Perek Beis in Tanya, beneged to the inif and naficha, that when you have air inside you and you blow it out, then the Alter Rebbe says, "Kol man de nofach." He brings b'shem Hazar Kodesh. Man de nofach mitoichei nofach. Whoever blows from his pnimiyas. And it says the Alter Rebbe over there, pirush, and he says another pirush, mitoichei yusei u'mipnimi yusei yeitzeh mea adam benefichosei bakuya. He blows bakuya. So we see from that, when he talks, he also gives off air, and it also goes out into the air. And even if he shouts, it also to a certain extent does as well. But it's not to be compared with when he blows. Bakoyach, then some people, if they blow, for a couple of minutes, they get all dizzy, and and that means to say that there's a tremendous koyach goes out of the koyachas hamiyuchodim imaguf alidei the inifan naficha, because the inifan naficha is a inifan adova nivdo. The whole inyan of the purpose of naficha is that air or wind or whatever you might call it, which was miyuchad with your etzem, goes out into the air and becomes completely nivdal, a koyach nivdal, that causes toichi yuseu of nima yusei. In other words, that the shurish is in the atzm, in the atzmiyas of the adam harbei yoter. And I say this page kama v'kama misholim, that where a mensch gives forth a dova nivdo mimenu, then that calls on the inyan ha'etzem. And on the contrary, even in middle points, for example, like we said, shouting, well, that's a causing of the air to go out, but derech dibur, or since it's with an effort that he wants dafki to reach a mochim rochik, then it's very similar to naficha. It's already a dova nivdo mimenu harbi yosef v'diyin and dibur. V'kam v'kach harbi inyonim. The word of man has to make a strong effort to give something forth that will be poil in the materials of the world. But if a nivdov mimeno, but it will be daki his koya, or that causes how do you call it, a ta'atzumais, as it's called in Lashon Kodesh, inside the eter. Much more than when an inyan goes off from him, but there ha'ora bilvad. So Azay the Seichel Maila, Kaviyochel, that when the Eivishter gave off the inyan harashimu, but that's the etzem nekudas koyach ha'gvul, shemiskala mimenu, then Kaviyochel, that's mushrash yeser omok in the etzem, and that comes forth in an even nivdal mimenu. That's one on the ganze beer, the word rashimu, that means a dover hanivdal, and it means that the inyan is, I think, Kaviyochel separate from the, not begolui the kesher with elikus. Nothing is separate from it, but it comes in as our even, that it's nearer muvdal, or that's mushash, the atzmusi harve yoter. And Mamila, that's the difference between Shem. Why is it that Shem causes kol atzmusi shala adam? Because it's a dover nivdal. The Baal is a dover nivdal, it's gotten itself a certain koyah to be moishak the etzem davke. Mashenkin inyonim van oyer, even though they indicate the mile, agoyse bal seichel, when he gives over a seichel, then it's nika that he's a great man, but it's not moishak as kola, it's not moishak as kola etzem. That's the difference between the and the Shem. Oh, but we're not talking. The Rebbe's point is that that's not our inyan. Our inyan is a begilui hadvarim, then Oyer is ein von Scheiches with Dveikes in the Moor, the Ir the ein von Shem is ein shall period ve Helem. Just ein noch anami, there's a certain mile in that period ve Helem, aber ein ze in Yone beregeze. In other words, it is play over derech Helem. Think to say with the Kalim, their whole kesher with Elikus is Ir v'ga moihi chad. It's not Ir v'chayeu chad. It's Ir v'ga moihi, and it's very separate one from the other until it's mavur with Jewish Chassidus. One of the aliyahs of the neshama that she's oile alidei hoyerida lamata alidei ganze mata nicht. What the neshama mata tzerto lamata in the guf hagashmi, the ganze do is to go from the yichud of gamoihi with ihu into the yichud of chayeu imiyu. In other words, to reach the yichud of the oiris and not the yichud of the keil. Because the neshama b'derech yiridas lamata comes through the inif chitzenius hakelim. Come over in the famous Igeros from the Alter Rebbe, chapter Kof in Igeros HaKoid. Adar, we see then that in Yonim mitzad dveikes and shayches have their own tremendous mile, and there's miles mitzad the inif from Dover Nivdal. Aber when I get to the Gilu in a Dover Nivdal, bleibt a Dover Nivdal. Yeah, and that's on the contrary. Lagavi the Yechilas of the Eivishter and Lagavi the Shlemas of his Yechilas, that's a greater Inyan. Yes, was a Inyan Masuyam Nifla. Over when I get to the Etzem Gilui and the miles of Gilui Ha'etzem and Ma'ena Etzem, that's Dabki in the Inyan Ha'oyer and not in the Inyan Ashay. So there we that's better. Loch on a yoidim. Where are we? The oiru b'chinas gilu etzem u'mi'ena etzem lefishu b'chinas devekes el ha'etzem. V'lochein on a yoidim al kaponim mizem milas ha'etzem. V'Hashem eina b'chinas gilu ha'etzem. V'loi me'ena etzem. Lefisha eina b'chinas devekus el ha'etzem. From the Inyan of Shem, we don't really know all these inyonim. It's just that there is a certain mile in Shem that through that we can reach a Inyan Achmi. Yoter, but that'll be dealt with later in the piece. That's not the Inyan right now. Therefore, he makes that difference. Hashem eino b'chinas gila etzem v'loi me'ena etzem. Lefisha eino b'chinas dveikes ela etzem. And therefore, it's not gila etzem. It's not ma'ena etzem. It's just got the ability to be, as it were, toifasi etzem. It's got the ability to be mamshik, a certain Inyan from the etzem. And that is a zgula nifloa, he yoisei dova nivda. Aber nicht das ist the Inyan what we're talking about here. Lefisha eino b'chinas dveikes ela etzem. Ulezois, hagam shenimshecha etzem alidei Hashem, mikol mochim hu b'chinas hilim. It happens in a way that we don't really recognize how that happens. And even if we'll say that the etzem is nimshach, it's not nikah, and it's not known klau how that is. Aber the inyan van gilui ha'etzem alidei oyer, or that's inyan van gilui and inyan van yedia, and we can come to know the milas ha'etzem and even ma'ena etzem through these galas of that gilui. Sure. So that's like a adkan abiyah bekitzer el chaponim in the hevdel between Oyer Hashem and the oifen of the yachas to the etzem. Now we come to the third inyan we mentioned, and he said, "V'hinei inyan hamalucha hu koach nivdal yesem inyan ashay." In other words, that we saw that the Inyan of Shem was bedimun to the Inyan HaKoyach. Yeah, the Inyan from Koyach, and albeit Koyach was the Inyan Nivdal, and it came in the form what Lamaila, that's the Inyan of the Kalim, and it's got a kesher to the Inyan from Shem also, as well known, that the Shem is Lamaila, the Dafki in the Inyan of Kalim, come over and look in Torah. Aber, al Choponim, they do have a certain Inyan of kesher with the etzem. On the contrary, like we saw, that they cause a panir alidei etzem, and they cause a gili of certain inyonim etim v'chulu. And everybody understands that the koyach hanefesh, k'moy shahim, have a certain yichud with the nefesh. It's just not the yichud of voya, it's the yichud of koyach. Avol chaponim, it's not completely ainen was be'etzem with this nivdal. Mashenken, he said, the inen from malucha, who koyach nivdal yesem inen, even more than the inen from etzem, malucha is a inen from havdalah. How does that work? Tahare, inen haisnasis, but that's the inen of malucha, it is self-elevation of a certain individual in the form of a ruler. That's what isnasis means. Yeah, the inen of isnasis, hu rak alazulas. It can only be on another separate personality. Ukemaima ein melech b'loi om. As the famous statement has it, you can't have a king without a people. That's going on in Shara Yugat. The Alter brings a lotion that am is from lotion uimemes nifrodim, blocks of coals, little pieces of coals that tend to separate and split off one from the other. That the word am means adover anifrod, and therefore it's from the word uimemes, which means separate coals, little pieces of separate coal. And so the inif ein melech without a separate entity, and in that entity gufa, it's got to be something which is be'erach to him. You can't say, or it's got a certain closeness to him, because you can't say that a person would be a melech of stones, or a melech of tables, or you can't even say that he would be a melech of animals. Yeah, you can say that maybe he's they call him, the animal king, or was the king of so on and so forth. They might give him circus names and so on. That's only a mitzvah, because a man can't be a king over animals. He can only be a king over his own species. I know over human being. Or in that kufa, they've got to be completely separate from him. Because if he was to try and be king over all of his relatives, then he probably would be in difficulty. And he wouldn't be able to be a functioning king over all of his relatives, because they're not separate enough from him. They're too hamish, as they say. They're too close, and they're not separate, but even mukhlat. Yeah, therefore, he can maybe be a bit of a sort of a granddad, he called a patriarch, that type of thing. Of a mamisha melech al Kurevov, also he can't be. It's got to be definitely a zulas, definitely somebody who's nifrad mimeno, behechlet, or even borrow nifrad, then he can be a king. Ein melech beloi om. Albeit, it's got to be, that's an interesting point which we're not dealing with here, but you'll notice, mitech the biur hadvarim, that it's got to be an entity which is of the same basic species as him, as we just pointed out. And that's the whole inyan, klapi maila, that Yidden, being as they are, chelakam mimail, therefore Shait the Abish would be a king over them, because they have the mile of being korev, kaviyochel elamach. Over lamata, it has to be tafka lidei b'nei, but the ikir for what we're concerned with here is, however, that they've got to be the b'nei od nifrodim from the melech. So he says, the imi mashenki malucha einu shaya b'li. Now where are we? Loikamei Hashem. Where are we? The dinan isnasis hu rak al azula. Ukamaima ein melech b'loi om. The b'loi om she'im b'chinas nifrodim me'amelech einu shaya klau inan ha'malucha via isnasis. Isnasis meaning him elevating himself into an elevated state over other human beings. V'loi kamoi Hashem. The bi'amitas einu rak l'tzedach hazulas. The whole inyan of Shem is not just purely for the sake of the zulas, but gam beloya zulas torik li'eis Hashem cannot, like we saw, that the Shem acts and is put up b'derech helef. Of an analyst, he needs the Shem even without a zulas. And as we bought the famous biur the Robinson Crusoe, wherever he was, that he would been born and brought up on an island, he would nonetheless, he does have a Shem, it's just that it wasn't called in him. And we saw even the Nafkimina by that the infant Kriyas Hashem causes a Tosefes Gilui, as we brought down just a few lines back. The Shem has to be there because the Shem is the medium Adam Shachas Achayas into the Evrei Agur. So a mensch has to have a Shem, even though it's Poel, Boy, and the Gabi de Zulas also to a certain extent, but Derech Helem. Aber, nonetheless, he can be a Baal Shem, and he has to have a Shem even without the Zulas. However, he says, Mashenke Malucha Einu Shayach Beloi Zula. The whole meaning for Malucha, without another person, it's not Shayach. So not to us, the famous Shaila, it's brought down that you have to be a Melech al Atzmacha, right? You have to be a Melech on your own self. And once again, that's Hashem HaMushulam Vayvim Suyam. It means you've got to be a Balabas over yourself, right? You've got to have the courage to guide yourself and not give in to yourself always, v'chule, and you've got to be a controller of your actions, all sorts of inyonim. But that's the inyan from a melech al atzmai. But it's not a emes, a inyan from melech, that means the inyan from shlita, kabbalah seo, v'chule.
Isn't Hashem also the melech of the Goyim and the whole world? The Eibishter is the melech not just to the Yidden. Nahon? The Eibishter is the melech of the world.
He's a melech over kol ha'olam kol. But the Goyim are not so much aware of that. And the Yidden, they kabbalah samalchis, they mamshich it al kol ha'olam kol. And therefore we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu. And then the way Mekabel his Elokus upon us, we become Yuchad with his Elokus through the Bittul Atzmi. Then we cause that he's also Melech Ha'oy. He also becomes Melech Ha'oy. And therefore we say in the capital before Tkiya Sheva, we say Molech Hashem al Goyim, that the Inif Malchus on them is whether they really want it or not. And that's totally in the Inif what will happen Bias HaMashiach, and what the Rebbe says has happened even before, is that they have to wake up that their real Melech is the Eibishter. And that's in the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noah, what they're going to say. In what the Rambam Paskins, that you have to cause a person to keep the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noah, and the day that you tell him that it happened because of Matan Torah. And so then he becomes like an Eved Lamelech, and so he does it because the Eibishter told him to do it. Imam, come to us, that the inner Nisnases, which leads to Malucha B'Poyo, is only if there's another entity in the form of a person, a separate entity altogether. It's not Shayach without the inner Zuras. Says the Rebbe, the Nisnases harizek koyach mikoychasa nefesh. So was it a kasha? Even though he said that the Isnasis is one of the koiches, it's one koich of the koiches ha-nefesh. It's part of the midah of Malchus in the Odom. And it's brought down that every Odom has got a certain trace of his Isnasis. And everybody has a certain tainug in Isnasis. In other words, that everybody likes to be a bit of a balabuez. And he likes to boss his friend around occasionally, and he likes to show that he's a bit of a leader, but it's Bola. And then there are certain peoples, what they have this unbelievable quirk that they want to become kings, and they actually they do become, or maybe even more pneumistic, they don't really want to become kings, but in the end it's made clear that they are the one that has to become the king. And then they begin to be Megala the Inif and these Nasas. Well, that's another discussion, but it also happens to be true. Edefa, says the Rebbe, it's a koyach mikoyches hanefesh, meaning that it's miyuchad with the Adam, and it's miyuchad with his etem. And we just said that the koyches hanefesh, ain't no chanami, they're not derech oyer, but they are derech shem. And I mean, it's not completely nivdal mimeno l'chayra. And why would you say it's only when there's we don't have that in the koyches hanefesh? All koyches of the nefesh, a mensch has, and he can even express them and bring them to Gilu, even without the inyan of Azula. I said, therefore the famous dogma, of the union of the union from Chesed. You can say, well, without other people to be makabel, the union from Chesed, not Shayach Chesed. It's not Shayach Ta'oini from Midas Chesed. So what's the deterrence? It is. Because we see that Avraham Avinu, when he was sitting by the tent and he was after the Milah, and the Malachim hadn't arrived yet, and he was mitztayer that there were no guests. It stated that Avraham Avinu was mitztayer that there were no guests. Why was he mitztayer? Because he had in himself the Midas HaChesed. He wanted to use the Midas HaChesed, and he just couldn't actually use it. But Poyel, that afar, he was uncomfortable and even in pain for Chulu. In other words, you can have the union of the Midah. It's just that the actual, maybe, shleimus of the Pulas Amida, nevertheless is brought in certain Jewish says the Pulas Amida needs Azula. Of the Yisraelis and the presence of the Midah can certainly be below Zula. Mashenkin, he wants to say that every day, if any snasas, which means elevating yourself over other people, is only shaykh if there are other people, and we'll see they become bottom to you and they accept your malchus, or then it's shaykh the Einif and his nasas. In other words, if a mention is Moira in himself, Einif and his nasas, then Hadikot is either he's a bit of a misled Balgaiva, or he's just Hadikot, he's dreaming dreams. Okay, it's not an Emesamida. Mashek in the Chesed of Avraham Avinu was tremendously powerful, even if he didn't have Al-Mili, his Chesed. On the contrary, it was so powerful that it caused him tar. Adar says the Rebbe, Mashek in about this Nasis, shame. And he said, it's not the inner like the inner from shame, the Bamitose, ain't no rak tzodik azulas, you have a gam below azulas, tzodik li Hashem canal. We saw that, I'm sorry. We've gone further, have we? Harigam be'atzmei hu p'chinas koyach nivdo. Where are we? Yeah. Agam, even though, how do we say? We started with the kasha. Ve'imiyot. This naza is a koyach mikoyach nefesh. Meaning there's miyuchad with the nefesh. If it's miyuchad with the nefesh, then why would it need dafkedin for now? Azuras, because all the other koiches are miyuchad with the nefesh, and they don't need the union of azuras. Mikol mocking, me'achish akol in yonim, hu rach ashayach el azuras, harikam bi'atzmei, hu b'chinas koyach nivdal min ha'etzem. He says that since the whole union is not even shayach without azuras, like we said, there can be chesed, and chesed b'shleimus hapula can only be when there's another person. Or but there can be a mitis a chesed b'li the zulas. Obadin if an isnases is not even applicable cloud, even as a midah without a zulas. Shalever said the Rebbe, even though it's one of the koiches, it's different than those koiches in that it is a dova nivdal minayatem. In other words, here's an interesting thing, that this is a koyach, but it's not like shame, it's got another status all of its own right, that is mamish nivdal minayat. And that is because its whole function is only aliday, dvorim anivdolim mea sha'arei. Yishnas zois eina inim bifnei atzmoi, ki im ma shebo b'der mamela, I'm sorry, I keep reading ahead of time. Who begins koyach nivdal minayat. Sure, full stop. Amamela, nimta, that the union of koyach hamalucha b'ha'adam is in the adam gufa, ado kilo, which is nivdal mimana. It's kilo oimed, afilo betoik p'nim yusay. U'beinei u'bein atzmei, it's oimed kilo in an oimed van avdola mimana. Amamere, adideze, it's efshel atar, it's odeze dova, that if that was at the midas malucha shebekol adam, and it was miyuched with betachas like sharia midas bekol adam, then every adam would sort of have a certain thirst to be somehow or another misnasei or bnei adam. Like we said, to a certain extent, in a way, people are misnasei, but not everybody, and not bechol zman, but not bechol or ifanim. And it's only by certain people that it's a midas nasas is actually yitchel day gilui b'shleiman. and therefore he all suddenly wants to become a Rosh V'lo Yisof V'chuliver. He wants to be a leader and a balabos and a ganze macher and a ganze dus. And he wants to be eager to rule over other people. And that Stavki demands that even if his nasses, otherwise it's not the milui hamida. He doesn't feel the satisfaction of the middle of the club. So that's a simon that the whole thing, that it's only lefrokim, but b'nei odom mesuyomim. That's a simon that it's a dover nivdal. It's not necessarily just mitzad the odom by definition mashu. It only occurs by certain people b'zmanim mesuyomim. And if says the Rebbe, it's a inyan nivdal minha. However, that's only one side of the coin. It's only one inyan in Malucha. And that's the inyan from Malucha, how it's already become the soirer to express itself legabi other b'nei odom. Not anything else, only legabi other b'nei odom. Well, then it works in a way that it's moved al afilu mimenu. And how much more so that it's only pure when it's got a dover ha-anta. And that's what we call Malucha b'foyel, or we call it Malucha al-am. That's the inner Malucha outside to the subject. But then there's another form of Isnasis, and that's what we call a Isnasis Pnimius, Fiatzmius. What that's the inner that the mensch is be'etzem muvdal v'naila be'etzem atzmusa misha b'nei odom. He's got certain milas that he's just elevated and he's above them. And therefore, he could even to a certain extent be said to be like an essential leader, be'etzem atzmusai, even though he may not have come leaders there, and he might not come to it. But it's pretty likely that he won't. Because usually a person of that nature, the Eibush has got for him certain inyanim. Edify. He said there's a isnasis, which is a isnasis, not that he makes himself a leader over people, but he's just automatically incomparably greater and elevated, and that regard, as it were, others are bottled to him, just mitzad atzmi. That's what he is, better definition to it. And that's a inifan isnasis, a midas hamalucha, which is miyuchad with the etzem. It's not kilu shayach davke alazulas v'chuli, because lav davke that it's going to actually come lepoyel. When it comes lepoyel, then it will be shayach alazula. In other words, that here's a case where he's menusa alazulas without the zula. He's menusa alazulas mitzad etzem inyona, mitzad what he is, not because he has a chesed to be misnaseh al ploini. That's called the inyan for nisnasis hamiyuchad with the etzem. And that's two different inyan. The only thing you can say is that somebody who's menusa b'shleimus mitzad atzmosei, he will mustama become a king, and one way or another he's the one that's meant to be the king. And that's what we see, that when Shmuel Hanavi was sent by the Eibush to look for Shaul, then when he looked at Shaul, he saw that he was mishich ulamayla gavoya mikol ha. He was from his shoulder and from his the middle of his shoulder blade, and higher. He was higher than everybody else. And so, in the famous Samech Samech Tes, the Rebbe Nishmas Yedin is masber that the Shechem medin for midas guvat, and in midas guvat is a din for chitonius amidas. That Shaul Amela was even mitzad chitonius amidas, not moichet and all the other inyanim. He was unbelievably higher than everybody else. And therefore, in Gashmias, he was pushed tall and impressive looking. And as soon as Shmuel Hanavi saw him, he said, Zeh Bechir Hashem. This is the one that the Eibush wants. In other words, he saw that he had himself this inyan of his nasas amitias v'atzmiyas, and therefore Shaul got a chiddush when Shmuel told him that you're the one who's chosen to be the king, because he hadn't actually brought that down yet into the midah chitzonius lefiyah that wanted to already be a ruler over people. These two inyonim are very important to understand the whole beer of his nasas in Chassidus, and the truim hoba. That when who is likely the emes to have a proper hisnasis alam type midah, he who is be'emes ra'ui because he's menusa be'etzem atzmosay. That's the The Amiti Sinyan from his Nasa, that's what him Yuchad with the Etzem. It's not a middle which is Shaykh only to the Tzur. That's the Hevdo Ben Shnei Ha-Inyanim. I will just see that briefly and then I'll have to leave this thing because I've got to go to a chasna, somebody very close to myself. Therefore he says, Onom, Yesh Bechinas is Nasas Atzmi, Masha Maruma Manusa Bi Etzem. She'ein ze Bechinas Koach Nivdel Men HaEtzem. Shali is Nasas Reis, Eine Ine Bifnei Atzmi, Ki Masha Bo Badar Mamela, Me Etzem Ma'alosai. Shehu Marumam Bi Etzem Mahusa. He is a elevated person in the very essence of his being. V'im Kain, Ein ze Nivdel Klau Men HaEtzem. That's not, he's not Nivdel Klau. Men HaEtzem, no, das ist Miyuchad, Itoi, Be'emes, O Be'emes, Yesh Bin an Amlucha, Gam Kein Beis Madreges, Alla Begin Zarim is Nasa Be'etzem, Mahusay, Shenu Shaykh al-Azulas, Ba'abeis, Beginis is Nasas al-Amu Medina. The Belay Azulas, Enu Shaykh is Nasas. So we'll hold there for this evening, and that's what the Tzvanon, the Friedrich Rebbe, he said not long before Yud Shvat, Toshin Yud, some people were in Tichidus and he wasn't able to talk clearly at all. But there was one of the people who said that he understood what the Rebbe was saying. And he said about the Rebbe Melech Mashiach, he said that I named him, and he called the Rebbe by his name. And he said, is Gor Anandra. He's completely not a person. Thanks. That's the union of his Nasas. That's the union of his Nasas Atzmiyas. In other words, that's his Nasas Mitadi in Etzem, in the very essence of the Etzem. That's another Indian altar together. Somebody who's like that, probably he's the one that's going to become. And therefore it didn't help one way or another, the Rebbe had to become. And that was just before Yud Shvat, Toshin Yud, when the Rebbe said that famous remark, the Friedrich Rebbe. And that's a shot to Gor and Andere, he's another one altogether, meaning that he's got this Nasas Amitiyas. Good. Alright guys, so the Eibusher is all helping that